although you've come here to listen to music, I'm going to have to burden you with a few principles or concepts in the hope that the few pointers that I will give you will help you to better appreciate the first section of this concept. I don't intend to give you a history of Russian church music. And that makes my introductory talk all the more difficult, because I need to convey to yourselves some principles that are essentially quite abstract. And this is quite a challenge. I hope I will be successful in this. Before we can talk of music as such, I need first of all to raise three questions. The problem of our contemporary ear, the question of what chant actually is in comparison to other forms of music making, and the principle, thirdly, of sound itself. Our first point, the modern ear. We can say very briefly that it is first and foremost simply grossly oversaturated. Today we can listen to our favorite piece 100 times if we so wish. We go beyond memorizing it, and we go beyond appreciating it, so that it simply becomes background music in our minds, even though it might be our favorite work. Whereas 100 years ago, and even less, people waited sometimes for years and years to hear something just once. And so this is the first difference between ourselves and certainly the medieval man. The anticipation, the sacredness, the uniqueness, and the mental preparation that they underwent as a process of appreciation is vastly different to that which we experience today. Secondly, I think in all fairness, we can say that our ears are the victims of the post-romantic era. To generalize, when we listen to something, we expect to hear, first of all, something that has an appealing or pleasant and memorable melody. Secondly, we expect to hear a suitable accompaniment to that melody. And thirdly, we expect an emotional stimulation or gratification from that musical experience. This is all very much, this type of appreciation has very much taken a shape as a result of the Romantic era. And this has been capitalized, as have all our other senses been capitalized upon by the modern market to make everything as acceptable, as appealing, and as memorable as possible, so that we are simply zombies of appreciation. We must, as much as possible, for this concert, remove from our consciousness these two problems. And we must, if we wish to be akin to the earlier and cleaner ear, we have to make this effort. We have to make this leap in time. Secondly, what itself is chant? Chant is a form of musical expression, but it is not necessarily music making. Chant is actually a wonderfully mysterious and personal process because it connects two principles that work internally in opposite directions. Here we begin to get a little bit abstract. Chant requires a text. A text is a clear and concrete thing. Text inspires thought. Thought can inspire reflection. And reflection moves one to abstract thinking. So we move from the concrete to the abstract. Thought, of course, and the text is non-verbal. When we are inspired from this mysterious area of our being, the lungs, the heart, breath, spirit, purely abstract things, we produce sound. And sound becomes concrete and finite and gives form to thought. And so we move from the abstract to the tangible. Two things which internally contradict themselves and pass each other, going in opposite directions. And so I think it's fair to say that these are the two wings of chant, and it's this combination that is unique to the process of chanting rather than music making, which puts chant in a unique position of being highly personal, interpretive, and powerfully psychological as an expressive vehicle. The third point is sound itself. There are two ways of approaching or understanding the question of sound. One is to imagine a note. A note comes out of silence. Sound is born in silence. If we lived in constant noise, we would not hear sound. And so sound appears from silence. Sound has a lifespan, and sound finishes and returns to silence. Sound lives and dies. This is a linear and metric understanding of sound. The second approach to sound is a more creative and broader approach. Something that always exists but condenses, makes its statement, and dissolves itself, returns to an eternity, impacts, interacts, and moves on, but never ceases. Much like the waves of the sea. The first principle is encumbered by a certain restraint. A restraint in time, a restraint in volume. The second carries a certain freedom because it relates expressively rather than metrically. And it's these two approaches to sound that create good music. The structuring of music, the shaping of music, and the defining of music, the memorizing of music requires the first understanding. The expression of music and the impact of music requires the second understanding. Together, the two methods give or offer a transcendent experience. If we think of sound in itself, we can understand some of these principles and the mystery of sound. If we think, for example, of the cry of a newborn baby, is it a cry to death or is it a cry to life? If we think of a cry of excitement, an emotional exclamation, the same sound can imply a cry of fear, a cry of surprise, a cry of joy, or a cry of terror. The content of the same sound can be very, very varied. And this is the freedom and the richness if we structure these sounds or noises. This is the freedom and the richness of sound itself. This is a vitally important principle for the appreciation of early unison chant and polyphony. Chant in many voices. And I will explain to you why. Imagine one voice, one note, one sound. Imagine the fullness and the freedom that the chanter experiences and expresses. The moment he produces a second sound, he experiences a relationship. He has moved up or down. And so he builds his structure. But that structure hovers in absolute freedom and is expressed from within. If it serves to relate to a text, it becomes all the richer. But the freedom of the expression is the most important thing. There is no relative comparison within the process of the actual making of sound. This is the uniqueness of one voice. When you will hear the first pieces of this the first examples of this early Russian polyphony, this is exactly the experience of the chanter. As soon as you produce a second note, a second voice, it is like a little ship dropping an anchor into the ocean. You have created a relationship on the vertical plane, not on the melodic horizontal line. And you have grounded the sound. You've created a bass line or a vertical relationship. And from there you have a completely different concept. The development of vertical relationship in sound was the primary challenge in the development of Western music. The horizontal process of sound was the primary focus of Oriental or Eastern music. And so, as chant develops, and as you will hear in this afternoon's concert, rather than a vertical and harmonic process, you have a linear interaction of voices that begins from a principle of complete expressive freedom in unison and an attempt to contain this freedom with a polyphony through interaction of strands of voices finding contrast or commonality between each other. This is the principle of the chant that you will hear. And these are the two elements necessary for appreciation that you must ground yourself in, that you must prepare yourself for, if you want to enter into the mentality of early Russian chant in unison or polyphony. If you can do this, you will hear this chant with a medieval ear. The last thing that I would say is the abstract or the psychological aspect of the chant. And I use the word psychological in the classical Greek sense. Psychologia, knowledge of the soul. It was commonly understood, and even more, it was commonly believed that breath carries spirit, and that spirit emerges or rests in the heart from where it emerges. And so chanting was in itself a mysterious and sacred process by which the chanter found his own spiritual orientation and reflection, and through the process of chanting achieved a transcendental state and a religious fulfillment. For this reason, chant is not a melody. Don't listen for melodies. Listen for a musical connotation that fulfills and illustrates psychologically the text that it accompanies. This is the last point in my introduction to chant. I hope that what we offer you will be of pleasure and satisfaction and insight. Thank you very much.